Well, welcome back to one of my last videos. We actually have only a couple more chapters. Then we are done for the year. You guys made it. Yes, even with the craziness of COVID, we have made it through the year. You guys have been great. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed some of the different things I've done with teaching. It's been new for me, kind of interesting, kind of challenging. Some things I like, some things I don't like. Um, to you seniors, good luck. Hopefully, you guys went and got your cap and gowns. Sorry I couldn't be there. I had a prior engagement. I wish I could have seen you guys. Any of you taking AP tests, I wish you the best of luck. Hopefully, everything's going well. Those of you that have not checked in, hopefully, you do. If you have friends that haven't checked in, try to get them to check in. We got this chapter and probably just two more chapters, and then we're done for the year. Um, so let's get started. This chapter talking about how does water get from where we are at inland to the oceans, and everything that we do affects the ocean. So kind of being aware of things that we do on here on land and how much effect it actually has on the ocean. So the beginning part is talking about watershed. And I go, what is a watershed? Is it like something that holds water? Yeah, pretty much, basically. So a watershed is going to be any of the participation, so rainfall or extra water from watering, wherever that's going to gather in one spot from your house or from somebody else's house. And as it gathers into one spot, and it kind of gets held into something, is going to be called a watershed. And then collectively, those watersheds then will create a bigger watershed and so on and so forth. So it goes from like your little watershed into like a whole town watershed, and a whole city, and then a whole like county, and then maybe a whole state, and then it's eventually going to flow into the ocean. That's why they always like post those signs up on the at the beaches after big rains and stuff, because all the storm drain water drains into the ocean. So they'll post the signs, caution, water may be hazardous to your health due to the recent rains or whatever else may have happened. So those are what's going to happen with the watershed. Eventually, as they say, everything that you do on land affects the ocean. And we know that a lot of the things that we need the ocean, because if we don't have the ocean, we don't survive. Remember the whales and all the phytoplankton, all the oxygen that actually comes from the ocean for us to be able to breathe. So if we have all those dead zones and we create more dead zones, then we're going to have a harder time living on land and with everything that we're doing to destroy our ocean. And since the ocean is one really, really large ocean, the whole world is all connected. So everything we do affects some part of the ocean. So it's all going to be intermixed, because we know that whales kind of take a lot of it, and fish take a lot of our waters and move them around as they're going, and waves and everything, currents. So most of our cities and towns, we all have storm drains as we watch, and even like at school, you see when it rains, we have our storm drains. Sometimes they get clogged or whatever. But all of that water eventually is going to end up in the ocean. So like when you throw trash out and you just leave your trash, especially like at nutrition or lunch, and you just whatever, you're too lazy to get it to the trash can. Eventually, that's going to end up in the ocean, and that's going to really do a lot of damage, as we learned in that last chapter, a lot of what can happen when we damage our ocean. So then we're going to move on to topographic maps. So can we read those? What do they show us? What do they tell us? So they show us different types of landforms, whether it's a hill, a mountain, a valley, a stream, a lake, a pond. So pretty much everything on land is what it's going to show us and kind of describe to us. Different contour lines. So ladies, we all know what contour, using your contour makeup, right? So contour lines are actually going to be drawn to connect equal points around that are the same height. So it would just kind of be this way. So if it's a different level, it's going to have a different contour line. So, and it's going to measure the level above sea level. So how far above sea level are we? So if we're all 50 feet above sea level, then we'll have a contour line. But if it's 47 and 38, and so they're going to all have different contour lines. And then the distance between each slope indicates the change in elevation. So you might have higher slopes. Some of you go snowboarding or snow or skiing. No, you go to the higher slopes and the lower slopes, and you kind of go up and down all over the place. Well, those are all going to be shown on a topographic map. So that's some of the ways that the scientists can learn where different things are. And then the distance between the contour lines determines how far the slope is. Um, and if it's more gradual, if it's going to be steeper, or if it's closer and steeper, the lines are going to be closer. And if it's further away, then the lines are, it's going to be more gradual. So sometimes maybe when you're going up a like cannon, the hill cannon, that's kind of like a gradual line, a gradual hill. But if you're going up straight up the mountain, it's going to be a very sharp, closer. They're going to have closer top lines because it's steeper. So fresh water is about 3% of the total water on Earth. We know that we get 75% of our oxygen from the ocean and then 25 from here on Earth from the plants and trees here. And so the fresh water is going to be stored in ice, underground, surface bodies of water like ponds, lakes, rivers, streams, and wetlands. So some of all that is going to be where that 3% total comes up. Some people go, God, what's the difference between a lake and a pond? Let's think. Well, there's no real main difference, or there's no real big difference between a lake and a pond. But the difference is that a lake is usually bigger and usually deeper than a pond. A pond is usually smaller, and the temperature pretty much stays the same in a pond because the sun can actually heat it up. And so in a lake, obviously, the deeper you go, the colder it's going to go because we know that sunlight can't penetrate that far down to warm up the water that's down in the down further, which would be colder. So there are some very large lakes like the Great Lakes in like Minnesota area, Minnesota, Wisconsin area, in the Midwest, that can actually affect the climate of the area, just kind of like the ocean can affect our climate. So it's kind of that same thing because it is so large, it can affect the climate. Ponds, as I say, stay pretty consistent in their temperature. They support a variety of plant life because they are that same temperature, so they all kind of want to grow there and live there, and they enjoy it. Kind of like our temperature here in California is much more stable than like Midwest or the East Coast. It's like all over the place, so that we can survive here a little bit easier than we can in the East Coast. And some ponds don't have the same water all year. So some ponds, they will actually, because they're so small or they're shallow, so they'll dry out if it gets dry and there's been a lot of sunshine, they'll dry out and then they'll get all new water the next time the rainy season happens, or they may kind of flush out and get clean water as the next sort of rains happen. Wetlands are going to be a transitional area between land and water, and depending on how saturated it is, it depends on the wetlands. And that's going to help determine what kind of soil is there and what kind of things that are going to be able to live there and survive there. Because if there's too much of one, then something's not going to be able to live there. If there's too much of something else, then something else is not going to be able to live there. A lot of wetlands also are a combination of salt and fresh water, which is then called an estuary. They are going to be a lot of times on the coastal areas. There's a lot of like marshland. What state? Probably Florida, and along that Gulf Coast there. So Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, all those areas are going to have a lot of like wetlands and marshes and that type of stuff there. So sometimes there are floodplains, and so a floodplain is going to be when it rises above the riverbank. So you have your riverbank here, and then anything that goes above it is going to be the floodplain because it's going to absorb the excess water from when it rains into low-lying areas. Moving on to rivers and streams. Rivers are going to be larger than streams. They're going to flow into larger bodies of water like bays or the ocean or bigger lakes, and they can receive water from smaller streams. So they kind of have that whole flow there. Again, some streams are going to be kind of like ponds where they can dry out during the dry season, or if during a hotter season or a drought, they can dry out and then get new fresh water when we get rain. The source for both is going to increase until it's going to continue going like downhill until it reaches a larger body of water. So gravity is going to have a little bit of pull with that, and then because it's always going to go downhill, it's never going to go up. So the river source is going to be called the headwater. And then it's going to take the path of least resistance. Always water is going to take the path of least resistance. So it's never going to be in a straight line. It's always going to kind of go like this and over here and over there and kind of snake around. So it's really kind of hard to tell exactly how long a river or a stream is because it's always going to zigzag. And if you're zigzagging, it's going to take a lot more surface area than if it's just taking a straight area. Groundwater. So the water stored underground is called groundwater. It's usually going to be from rain or from runoff. That it's going to seep into the soil, and then whatever doesn't get absorbed by the soil is going to continue to seep down, seep down, seep down until it hits a rock. Because when it hits a rock, it can't get through a rock, but it can get through the soil. So then the rock is going to just kind of hold it there, kind of like a cup. So it's going to sit there until it finds another way to maneuver or get extracted out. But a lot of times it's collected there, and that's sometimes where we get our drinking water, or we get our water that we use for irrigation for a lot of the farming areas. And then that area is going to be known as an aquifer because it's going to purify the water that's there, because that's what rocks do. They actually purify the water. That's why a lot of the water in Hawaii is so clean, is because it's getting purified through the volcanic rock. After the rain falls and it goes through there, it's going to get purified, and then it's going to be brought up to us to use for drinking and watering and whatever else we need our water for. There is the Agala aquifer is the largest, and it's actually part of 8 states, which is pretty huge. So it's primarily used for irrigation in those areas because those are big farming states, and so the areas are there, and it's about 2,000 mile or there, and it approximately uses about 408 billion gallons, which is about 21% that we used back in year 2000. Sorry, back in the year 2000, approximately 408 billion gallons was used by the United States, came from underground. So it's about 21% of our water that we used. An area where groundwater flows to the surface is known as a spring. So sometimes think about Colorado Springs. Okay, so they have water that kind of comes up, and you might see other areas that the water comes up from underground. Those are going to be known as springs. And as water flows, it's going to weather, and it's going to erode minerals and take sediments different places, and they're going to take it here and then deposit it over there. So things are going to move around with water. Water can take a lot out. And when water gets really moving fast, it can take a lot, and it can be very damaging. It can be pretty scary. If you ever, anybody done whitewater rafting and like been in there and seen, or you've seen where people get taken out on the whitewater raft and they get out of control, and or it's too much, or they wrap around a rock because they didn't steer one direction or the other, and water can be very dangerous. And water has a unique ability to dissolve minerals, so it's known as the universal solvent because it pretty much can dissolve anything. Some minerals are actually going to be easier to dissolve than others. They're depending on the hardness of the sediment or the mineral. Like limestone, it is very, very easy to dissolve. It's very soft. So you're going to find a lot of that in Florida, especially like in the wetlands, and so it gets dissolved there. Like an igneous rock, like I was talking about, the volcanic rock, that's actually a lot harder, so it doesn't really get dissolved. That's why it can actually be, it's very porous, so the water can get filtered through there, but it doesn't really get changed. So one of the ways that water is able to dissolve minerals is because its polarity allows it to pull and separate the ions of the salts. So because of that, that's how it separates those sediments. And then besides salts, water also picks up sediments, as I said, picks them up and deposits from A to B and B to A and all over the place. And so you might think a rock starts here in California, ends up maybe down in Mexico or wherever else because maybe there was a big rain and it washed all the way out. Kind of crazy. Significant amounts of sediments are deposited at the mouth of a river, so it's all going to go down to right where the mouth of the river, so that's going to be right where it hits like the ocean, and that's going to be fanned out, and that's going to be called a delta. So there's going to be a lot more sediments there, and like sediments that could be coming from faraway areas, so who knows where they could have come from. And they could have been, like if the Mississippi River starts way up, high, and then could be deposited way down low, down by the Mississippi or down by the Gulf of Mexico. So in beaches, the sediments are going to be sand, and since sand is going to be broken down coral, so the waves and other currents and stuff are going to break down coral, or people being out there are going to break down coral, and that's what's going to be the sediments or the sand. And so sand gets deposited onto the beach and then gets also taken out depending on the waves. And so when we have a lot of big waves during the winter, it's going to take away a lot of the sand, and when we have the smaller waves, it's going to bring the sand back, or you're going to notice it seems like there's more sand on the beaches. The second part of the chapter is going to talk about freshwater and how it helps them determine whether the ocean is healthy or not. This is really important for us because we can determine how healthy or unhealthy our saltwater, our ocean is from our freshwater. So we have nitrogen and phosphorus, which are two elements that too much of either is going to be a problem, and that's going to be called a eutrophication, which is out of control algae, or like a bloom. We've talked about blooms before. And when there's a bloom, you have all the algae will die all at once, and then the decomposers come in and break it down, and so it's all gone, and the oxygen is gone, so then fish die and other critters and everything else that need oxygen to live, which is everything, they will actually all die. So increased levels of nitrogen and phosphorus can cause even like the red tides or the brown tides, which again are not going to be good for and healthy for that area. Some of the sources of increased nitrogen or phosphorus are going to be waste, so from us, fertilizer, so when every time you fertilize your lawns and everything else or whatever, especially if you're using fertilizer like from that's not like natural, and in the, whether it rains or you're watering, and especially if you're overwatering it, it's going to end up in the runoff and end up in the ocean, which is not good. Water treatments, so when we are sewer treatments, and then leaking septic tanks. So some people actually have septic tanks that they have to take care of, and that's where all their feces and their waste go. And if it leaks into the ground, then eventually it's going to get into our ocean. And then again is animal manure runoff. We learned a lot about that in that last chapter from that video, how much the animal runoff is actually killing a lot of our ocean and a lot of our marine animals and areas, and doing a lot of destruction to the phytoplankton. And then finally, industrial runoff. So again, humans, we do a lot of damage. So moving on to a pH. So if it's less than 7, it's going to be acidic, and more than 7 is going to be basic. So the ocean is going to be slightly basic, and then most organisms are going to survive between 6.5 and 8 in the pH balance. So that's where we want to kind of keep it. So if it gets out of whack and if it gets too acidic, then there are fewer animals that can live in really acidic or salinity or high salinity areas. And then there's fewer animals that can live in really basic. But there are a few in each that can live there, but they couldn't live opposite. Dissolved oxygen, or DO, as we learned in the last chapter. So running water dissolves more oxygen than still water. So like in a stream, it's going to dissolve more water than a pond, because a pond isn't running. So a stream is going to dissolve more oxygen than that. So oxygen is going to enter the water from the atmosphere and the marine plants from photosynthesis. Fish and invertebrates require dissolved oxygen to be able to breathe and to release energy from their food. Remember that cold water actually has more nutrients than warm water, and we know that the whales help with this because as they dive down and they bring back up, they're bringing the cold water up to help the nutrients with the photoplankton, which then gives us oxygen. Sewage storms, the same things that cause problems in our ocean with the nitrogen and phosphorus are going to be the same things that cause problems with dissolved oxygen. So sewage storms, runoff, farmland, septic tanks all decrease the dissolved oxygen in the ocean, which again we know is a problem. Physical and biological parameters. Scientists measure the size of and depth of bodies of water with a physical nature. They check the banks and the amount of type of vegetation. They check the size and locations of the sediments. So they're always checking this to see what's kind of going on. And then we have our riparian vegetation, which is the amount and type on the banks from the fresh water. And it also helps keep the water cool because it shades that area. It helps anchor sediments so things aren't always being washed away. Plant roots help stabilize. That's why on a side of a mountain or a side of a hill, especially after a big rain. We want to plant things that can help stabilize that rain or stabilize that hill so all the mud doesn't go onto the street or wherever else or destroy houses. So especially after big fires, they want to kind of try to replant because that way it helps keep all that ground stable. It also reduces pollution carried to the ocean because it's going to kind of filter things and it's going to catch things. And then beach grass also helps keep the sand on the beach where we want it. Temperature, important parameters for organisms. It's measured in Celsius. If the temperature is too high or too cold, animals can be stressed and either going to move or they're going to die off. So that's going to be a problem also. That's why they migrate. We know that a lot of our marine animals migrate to warmer areas or to colder areas depending on the time of year. Again, some of the causes of temperature change are going to be seasonal, removal of plants, dam building, and then again, wastewater because it's going to heat everything up because of all the icky stuff in there. One of the other things we're going to talk about is turbidity. Turbidity is going to be how clean is the ocean, or how clear is it? Can you see through? How far down can you actually see in the ocean? Or how cloudy is it? If it's cloudy, it's going to be increased turbidity. Plants and animals do better with low, so in cleaner water or clearer water, due to photosynthesis needing light. So if it's really cloudy, think about like when you get water like from school, a lot of times it's really cloudy, and a lot of times that's because there's a lot of air in our water, and then you have to get through that and let it settle, and then it looks normal. But when you have photosynthesis needing light, and if it's really cloudy, the light can't get to the plants to have photosynthesis, so then that ends up being a lot of more problems for us. Some of the causes for increased turbidity is going to be shoreline erosion, sewage leaks, and then the suspended material in the turbid water can clog the fish gills, which is going to be a problem, and then they settle and they cover over eggs and other little organisms that are down on the bottom. So those critters end up dying because they're covered and they can't get out. They don't know how to get out. And they measure this by using a Secchi disc to see how much light is going to be seen beneath the surface. So increased lighting or increased readings is going to be cleared. Obviously, decrease is going to be more cloudy or more turbid. And that is going to be it for the chapter. So you guys, I hope everything's going okay. I really do miss you guys. Reach out if you need me, either on Instagram or through Google Classroom, whichever it is. This is just heartbreaking for me sometimes. Know that it's hard for us teachers too, not just for you guys. So I want to show you some things that I did. I did this a while ago. I made a couple of puzzles a while ago, but I actually framed them and I put them up. So this is one. It has a bunch of the different cereal boxes from Kid Time. And then this is another one. Take my glasses, sorry. And then this was like a bunch of different candies. So I had a lot of fun doing these. I did them, as I say, a while ago. Actually, I think I did them over Christmas break. And then I finally got frames for them and put them up. Just so you guys know, an update on Luna. Luna, I ended up being a foster mom for Luna, and I found him a great home. So yeah, I have no more kennel. But I will be getting a Rottweiler puppy at the end of June, and I'm really, really excited. So if you guys have any comments, want to say anything, you want to send me a video, go ahead, send me a video. Show me what you got. Tell me how things are going for you. Life's okay, but I'm still running most days, so trying to stay healthy. I hope you guys are staying healthy. I hope everything is going well, and miss you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.